By the end of this presentation, participants will be able to identify what cardiovascular disease is, discuss the importance of preventing this disease, and what it not only means for the individual, but what it means for society as well. Discuss ways in which the disease can be prevented through diet and lifestyle modifications, as well as overcoming some barriers that are common among this age group, such as low income. And they will be able to evaluate the effectiveness of these modifications and what needs to be done in order to maintain these modifications throughout their lives. Okay, so what is cardiovascular disease? The abbreviation for cardiovascular disease is CVD. Cardiovascular disease is defined as a group of disorders of the heart and blood vessels. Some of the diseases that are associated with cardiovascular disease are coronary heart disease, cerebrovascular disease, peripheral arterial disease, rheumatic heart disease, congenital heart disease, and deep vein thrombosis and pulmonary embolism. So often there are no signs or symptoms of disease within the blood vessels. However, a heart attack or stroke is normally an indicator that there is an underlying issue. There are symptoms, however, of rheumatic disease, which the symptoms are shortness of breath, fatigue, irregular heartbeats, chest pain, and fainting. Some signs or symptoms associated with a heart attack or stroke are pain or discomfort in the center of the chest, left shoulder, arms, elbows, jaw, or back, numbness in the face, arms, or leg, especially on one side of the body, confusion, difficulty speaking or understanding speech, difficulty walking, dizziness or loss of balance or coordination, difficulty seeing in one or both eyes, severe headache with unknown cause, or fainting or unconsciousness. So you might be asking yourself, well, why is this important? Cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death globally in men and women. It affects individuals' overall health and lifespan, and it affects the country and global economy, which we'll get into a bit later within this presentation. A recent study completed by the CDC looked at heart disease among Americans in 2019, and over the course of the study, researchers found that 1 in 13 men had developed coronary heart disease, and 1 in 16 women were found to have coronary heart disease as well. This is an alarming amount of people that have coronary heart disease alone. If we look at the amount of people that have cardiovascular disease altogether within America, which we will in a bit, you will be surprised to see how many people have this disease and how big of an issue it is. Now that we know what cardiovascular disease is, let's look at the causes of cardiovascular disease. Some of the causes are smoking, diabetes, obesity, physical inactivity, an unhealthy diet, or excessive amount of alcohol consumption. Cardiovascular disease can also be hereditary, but that is on the low end of causes of cardiovascular disease. A recent study gathered information from many Americans within America, and as we could see here, the people that are at risk for cardiovascular disease, out of the amount of people within the study, 36% are obese, 30% have physical inactivity, 29% have high blood pressure, 17% smoke cigarettes. And as we can see with this list of risks associated with cardiovascular disease, a majority of these risks are associated with poor nutrition. So let's look at the diet that is associated with cardiovascular disease. Some dietary patterns that are associated with the disease are an increased consumption of sugary foods and drinks, red and processed meat consumption, fried food, and an increased consumption of saturated and trans fats. These dietary patterns are common among low-income families and the older population. However, these dietary patterns can also be found among young adults and high school students who have low income as well. Now, the American diet is not very healthy. Americans eat more than 50% of their calories from poor carbohydrates and fats. The average calorie intake is 2,100 kcals, with 16% of it being protein, 47% being carbs, 36% fat, and 22% added sugars. Now, as you can see here in this chart, these foods are associated with the average American nutrients per day. Researchers did a study on the most common foods within an American household and found that a majority of people were buying grain-based desserts, regular cheese, sausage, pizza, fried white potatoes, and as you can see in this list, these foods are high in poor carbohydrates and poor fats, such as saturated fats and trans fats. Now, I just want to back out for a minute and look at what macro and micronutrients are so that you guys get a better understanding of what we are talking about when we're talking about proper nutrition. Macronutrients are the main nutrients that are needed for the body in order to maintain energy and normal functioning. So that would be carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. But we're looking at healthy fats, not unhealthy fats. Micronutrients are a smaller nutrition component that is needed for growth and healthy living, such as our vitamins and minerals like vitamin C, calcium, and fiber. Now, fat can be a confusing topic because there are some healthy fats that our body needs for our energy, but there are also unhealthy fats that turn into excess fat. So what is fat? Fat is necessary for the body for energy, warmth, protection of organs, absorption, and transport of vitamins. It can be found in oils, full-fat dairy products such as whole milk or whole yogurt, fried foods, fatty fish, nuts, seeds, avocado, and packaged and baked goods. Although fat is required for the maintenance of our body on a daily basis, excess fat can be caused by eating too many calories, and consuming excess calories can be stored as fat in either enlarge previous fat cells or create more fat cells, which are stored as adipose tissue and considered to be excess fat. Excess fat causes weight gain, fatigue, pain in the back and joints, depression and low self-esteem, trouble sleeping, shortness of breath, and inability to perform simple and physical tasks. Now you might be wondering, how does this relate to cardiovascular disease and the blood vessels? Well, excess fat causes a buildup of plaque within the arteries that supply blood to the heart. So that can cause the artery to narrow and reduce blood flow to the heart, which leads to chest pain, a heart attack, or stroke. Now let's look at some of the impacts of this disease. The disease can affect an individual, a home, community, workplace, hospitals, and the economy of the country and world. Now, some statistics of cardiovascular disease are that cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death within America. One person dies every 36 seconds to cardiovascular disease within America. 659,000 people in the United States die from CVD each year, which averages about 1 in 4 people per year. About 18.2 million people 20 years and older have coronary heart disease. So this is why it's important that we start to focus on the prevention of this disease as early as we can. Now, some statistics around the world, 17.9 million people around the world died from CVD in 2019, which averages about 32% of global deaths. 38% of premature deaths, which are 70 years and younger, are caused by CVD, and CVD has been officially declared the leading cause of death globally as well. So cardiovascular disease can obviously have a huge impact on an individual. There are health consequences associated with cardiovascular disease, such as quick aging, death, and disability. There's the financial strain, such as early retirement and a bunch of medical bills. And there's also the psychological aspect of it. It could cause depression, anxiety, and social isolation. In fact, the psychological aspect of the impact of cardiovascular disease could also lead to an increased risk for hospitalization, readmission, and a cardiovascular related death because a person has increased anxiety and depression, which can affect the heart as well. Now, the economic impact of cardiovascular disease is on a much larger scale. The total number of cardiovascular-related operations and procedures within America was 6,846,000 as of 2007. And that was definitely a couple of years ago, so the numbers only increased from there. We spent $286.5 billion on cardiovascular-related hospital visits in 2007. And the economic loss of early death due to cardiovascular disease mortality or death was estimated to be $26.9 billion as of 2007. And $58.2 billion was associated with reduced productivity at work due to absenteeism and permanent disability, and reduced productivity of people who were not a part of the workforce. So that means that people that couldn't work due to cardiovascular disease, $58.2 billion was spent on the people that couldn't show up for work. Now, a recent study looked at the economic projections of cardiovascular disease within America, and they found that in 2016, cardiovascular-related medical costs increased by 135%, costing a total of $318 billion in just direct costs. So that meant like procedures and operations and hospital visits. Indirect costs in 2017 increased by 55%, costing a total of $237 billion. So a total of direct costs and indirect costs were spent in 2016 of $555 billion. Now that's a lot. And they looked at the projections of the increase from 2007 to 2016, and the economic projection is $749 billion in direct costs, and $368 billion in indirect costs. So indirect costs are doctor's visits or checkups or going to urgent care, that sort of thing. And those two together would be $1.1 trillion spent on cardiovascular-related issues in 2035. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, how can we prevent the onset of this disease? You guessed it, through changing our diets.